Hello and welcome to Talk About Houses. I'm Oana.
And I'm Todd.
And today we're going to be speaking about short-term rentals, Airbnbs, how do they affect home values, rental values, and what does that mean to all of us?
So, as many of you know, there's this sort of debate going on about, if a person buys a house and turns it into a short-term rental, like we just use Airbnb, but there's other ones, but they're the biggest one. And does it make the harder for tenants to rent? Because the theory is, well, that was a house that could have gone to a long-term tenant. So let's talk about that first, because Oana knows quite a lot about property management. You manage properties for not short-term tenants,
no.
Long-term tenants.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, is an investor who's going to buy a short-term property that's been built for a short-term tenant, is that property type usually the type an investor would buy to put a long-term tenant in?
So that's an interesting question, because short-term rentals tend to be in nicer neighborhoods, nicer properties. The other thing that happens with short-term rentals, they are different than a long-term rental. A short-term rental has to constantly respond to what's happening in the marketplace by continually updating and upgrading the property. So they're really the closest thing that you would have to a new home, because they have the decor that's being updated and upgraded. They have fixtures that are being updated and upgraded all the time. So they are different than a long-term rental, because we all know that when we put in a tenant in a long-term rental, we're not going to go in there every few months and put in all new fixtures and all new things. The goal with a long-term rental is to put a tenant in there, the tenant's happy, and maybe the landlord goes in there once a year if they're lucky, as opposed to a short-term rental where the landlord's representative goes in there every few days as soon as there's turnover. So there's a lot better maintenance. There's a lot more updating with short-term rentals than there is with long-term rentals.
Okay, before we shot the video, I went and checked our Airbnb account.
Okay.
And we've stayed in over 100.
Okay.
Okay. So, as some of you know, we also travel. And so we've stayed in Airbnbs in San Francisco Bay Area. We've stayed in them in Sydney, Australia, and on Lake Como, and all over Europe. Zurich, Ireland, you name it. We've stayed in Airbnbs.
And we've stayed in Airbnbs in Eastern Europe, or formerly Eastern Europe, in Hungary, in Romania, in all kinds of places. Croatia,
yeah,
lots of places.
So something I've noticed is there is a segment of the market that doesn't work for an Airbnb. If you are in a general residential neighborhood, way out in the suburbs, not near anything interesting, that's where property values are lower. And that's where investors want to buy long-term rentals. Right. They want a house that they could sell in 3 or 5 years to somebody who's going to move in and live in it, right?
Right. The other thing that happens with short-term rentals, which is kind of interesting, it paradoxically helps long-term tenants from the perspective that at some point these short-term rentals do go on the market to be sold. So when they sell, a lot of times another investor will purchase it as a long-term rental property. And then those tenants obviously benefit from this home that is updated and upgraded, as opposed to other rentals in the area that still have fixtures and everything from 15 years ago.
Yeah, sure. For example, when we were in Zurich, a place we stayed, it wasn't a professional long-term rental. It was some guy who lived there who was going to be in like Hong Kong for the month.
Right.
And he was so what he did was he just put it on Airbnb. He left a key in the mailbox, and then he had a friend come by and clean up. He paid somebody to clean up afterwards. But it was all his stuff in the place. He said, just don't go into my stuff. But it wasn't like, that house was never going to go to a long-term tenant. Right. He lived there. It was his house. If there are vacation areas like Coronado, where the people live in the house 9 months out of the year, but the summer months, they basically leave and they make it a monthly rental. Right. For quite a bit of money. So you have a segment, like the houses that are being used for the most part. Now I'm not talking about all of them, because there's certainly some houses that are being bought that could have had a long-term tenant, that are being taken out of that pool, but then they're being used for short-term for a rental, which is perfectly legal if it's legal. It's good because sometimes it gets the landlord, the owner of the property, more money out of the house, which is the goal. The investor is not buying the house to do a civic duty to provide housing for somebody. They're doing it to make money, to make a return on their investment.
Right. So, for example, we stayed in an Airbnb in Amsterdam, and this was a person's apartment. She lived there full time.
Oh, right.
And she had used the money that we paid for the Airbnb to go on a cruise. And when we asked to extend our stay, we couldn't because she was coming back from the cruise and needed her home back. So Airbnbs are not always these full-time puppy mill kind of situations where you have people coming and going all the time. Airbnbs a lot of times are these part-time situations where the homeowner just Airbnbs the property while they're not there, whether they're away on business or they're on vacation. And this has been something that has gone on for forever and a day. I mean, I remember that when I was a kid. And it used to be really popular just in Europe, and it's Airbnb that has made it popular here in the US. But vacation type rentals have always been popular. Yeah. Like, for example, I remember when I was a kid, my dad and I and my mom, we stayed in someone's home for a year because he was a university professor who went on sabbatical and went to Europe to do work there. So this is not a new thing. Airbnb type situations have been around for a very long time. And they can be really good for neighborhoods. They can be really good for property owners. Like with anybody else, you can have good situations and bad situations. But overall, I think that these are good situations for both the neighborhood because these properties are better maintained. And I think they're good situations for the owner because they provide a source of income.
Yeah, so specifically with the Bay, like we'll just pick San Francisco Bay Area because there's always debate. There's where Airbnb is headquartered, and it's beautiful because we've got a tour of it. We got a tour of the whole Airbnb headquarters, which is really nice. But San Francisco, we use that as an example. That's where there's a lot of debate right now over short-term rentals being overtaking long-term rentals. Problem is, if you look at the value of a home in San Francisco Bay Area, downtown San Francisco, Peninsula, those areas, it's really expensive. And when you look at what rents are going for, a lot of times you're not going to even maybe pay your taxes and all your other expenses of owning the house. And if you get a loan, you can forget it. You're going to be upside down. So some of those houses don't make sense as a loan. I mean, no reasonable person would go to downtown San Francisco, drop $4 million on a house or a place to rent it out even for $6, $7, $8 a month because they're going to lose money. That's a bad investment. You could take $4 million, come to Las Vegas, buy 16 rental houses for $250,000 to get probably $1,200 a month out of each one, make $20,000 a month in rent, and then not have to pay all the crazy property taxes and all the other issues you would have in the San Francisco Bay Area. So my point is, all houses are not suitable for a long-term tenant. So the fact that the highest and best use of that house is either someone to buy it because they want to live there and they don't really care about their outflow of cash because they're paying to live there themselves, or they're going to do a short-term rental. If it made sense to do a long-term rental, they would do it, don't you think? I mean, economically.
Right. I mean, look, an investor's goal is to maximize profit. So if it made sense, they would do it. But it doesn't make sense. And as far as taking properties off the rental market, it does not, because these are not properties that would rent. These are properties that would be owner-occupied. So because of that, the argument that Airbnb type properties, short-term rental properties, take rental properties off the market is a false argument.
Yeah, I agree with that. This obviously, the problem is that you have people on both sides of the issue who, are trying to get their point to, hey, let's limit these things because rents are too high. If rents are too high, the problem is probably not some other person, and the Bay Area is a perfect example. rents were high in the Bay Area when I graduated from high school, because in 1982 when I graduated from high school, and Stanford was one of the colleges I could go to for an NROTC scholarship, I looked at how much it cost to live there, and it was crazy. I was like, I can't afford to live in San Francisco, you know, or in Palo Alto, in that area. It was super expensive. Those areas were always expensive. It was always crazy expensive to live there before Airbnb got there, before Google got there, before anybody got there. They were expensive areas. If long-term rents are a problem, then that's a problem probably with the number of people in the area and how much money they earn, and then the local government, and if they're restricting home building. Like if they're restricting, oh, well, houses have to be on at least this size of a lot, or you can't build them more than 3 high or whatever, that will push, like you can fix that tomorrow. Just say, hey, we're going to take these neighborhoods, we're going to let the houses go 3 stories high, people can subdivide them and rent them out. That would fix the problem. But having somebody short-term rent out their place, I don't know, affects rents.
Right. So, you know, so to your point regarding the Bay Area, you know, a lot of the issues in the Bay Area is that, number one, incomes are high. So when incomes are high, that means that people can afford to pay more. So that drives up prices. The other issue in the Bay Area is density. There are simply a lot of people, so there's a lot of demand. So again, supply and demand. So that's another issue. A third issue in the Bay Area is taxation, honestly. Because property taxes are so high, then rents have to be high in order to help cover those property taxes. So there are a lot of different issues that cause rent prices to be high. And short-term rentals, my opinion is that they are either inconsequential or such a nominal piece of that they're really not the issue to be tackled, but rather the other issues, which is the availability and you know, simply the fact that because incomes are so high in that area, you're going to have everything cost more. So for example, we've been to the Bay Area, and things that, you know, here in Las Vegas cost, for example, $25 in the Bay Area are going to be $45. Yeah. And, you know, you kind of balk at it. You know, I give a really good example of that. I went into a grocery store in the Bay Area to buy blueberries, and I balked because it was $8 for this little clam of blueberries.
And they grow them there.
You're kidding me. You know, the same clam of blueberries here at the grocery store is, you know, $2.
And they're grown outside of San Francisco.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's 4 times the amount of money for the same blueberries for the same amount. So when you look at it that way, you kind of get a better idea of the reason why everything is so much more expensive. You know, the bottom line is supply and demand. Yeah,
I mean, that's the bottom line, supply and demand. That affects rent houses. Yeah, I get people are upset with short-term rentals. They think, you know, especially people that are tenants, but that's just, you know, that's supply and demand. And unfortunately, you can't, you can legislate around it, but the market is the market, and the market's going to do what it needs to do. So I guess it's kind of, you know.
Right, and the bottom line is, look, if tenants weren't willing to pay the prices in the Bay Area, then the prices would come down.
Yeah.
That's really the bottom line.
That's really the bottom line.
So long as people are willing to pay it, the prices are going to stay high. So long as the incomes are high, then people will be willing to pay it. And that's the market.
Yeah. Well, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, that's great. We appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe and follow more of our videos. And thanks for watching Talk About Houses.